जाने वाली वहाँ से।
कौन सी सुनाओ? कौन सी लाइट जलाना चाह रहे हैं आप? लाइट कौन सी जलाना चाह
Hello everyone, can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Okay, perfect. So we'll be starting off today, and all right. So I couldn't really talk about this book in detail about this particular book. The last time when we did a live stream of this book, uh, I kind of missed out on having the audio part of it going on. So I'll be talking about this. And I hope you keep checking out my videos that I make on my YouTube channel on books and also on trending topics. I recently made, in fact, I uploaded one video on yesterday, and it was on the topic of sports. I mean, right now Commonwealth Games are going on, but that particular video talks about why Indian sport hasn't really matched up to its expectations in terms of how clutch of medals were missing in top games, especially Olympics and Asian Games, where countries like China, Japan, and other countries rule the roost. If you see, I mean, though I'm going off topic right now, but I just want to talk about it that since I'm really not into sports, but I really like sports. And apart from cricket, if you really want to make an impact, I think you should watch that video. It talks about why it's really not happening for India for so long. It's been more than 30, 40 years that we haven't really been there on the medal stage in world championships. Though we are performing really well in the Commonwealth Games, but the top powerhouses, especially if you see in table tennis, China is not there because it's not it's a Commonwealth game. They don't really participate in that game. So all of that has been covered in that video. Go check it out if you really are interested in sports and something that sort of gives you gives you a feeling of pride and you want to watch these games. They require a lot of viewership, so please go watch Commonwealth Games. And back to the book. So this is the book that I was talking about. I did read it. I did read two chapters, but somehow the audio was lacking. There was an audio problem, and whatever I said, I couldn't communicate it to you guys on the live video stream. So I'll be back on this book. We'll be reading it today, and I'll see how far I can go in this book. To sum up what I've told in the previous two videos, I'll just be, it'll be in a quick, uh, I'll give you a nutshell of what I've read till now. So in this book, the author has talked about the Jats and the Sardars and Nawabs in the area during the 17th century and onwards, wherein Satnamis were a powerful group which kind of wanted to dethrone Aurangzeb back in 1670s. They did not succeed in it. Aurangzeb was successfully able to crush them. He defeated them badly, and they were not able to match up to his powers, his strength, and he was defeated. So they were defeated. Satnamis were defeated. And after that, it talks about how the rise of Mughals happened through Aurangzeb, and how he converted a lot of Hindu Rajputs and Jats in that region of Haryana, because this book is essentially about Haryana. So Rors was a community of Rajput who were converted, Muslims from Hindus, and Mullah Jats were Jats before and were converted into Muslims Jats. So all of that has been covered in the first chapter, and then it talks about how in one incident Jat army got really powerful, because if you know, Jats who are occupying the land of Haryana today, back in 16th or 15th century, they were not really, an army sort of a, group. They were basically into farming, and they were just plowing their fields, making sure that they stick to farming. But come 17th century, 1671 is when Aurangzeb kind of, brought that a feeling of taking care of their land, or their culture, their tribe, is when they actually began forming a group under leaders like, Gokul Jat, who actually was the one who took part in this attack, where they went to the Akbar's mausoleum, the Grand Akbar, the Great Akbar's mausoleum, and they went and plundered the tomb, and made sure that they looted all the silver and golds there, items there, and also made sure that Akbar's mausoleum was destroyed completely, and they picked out his bone from his grave and threw it in the fire. It was a sign that, since Aurangzeb, his great grandson, was troubling Hindus at that point in time, they made sure that they, they gave it back to Aurangzeb in this form, that, what, you are converting us from Hindus to Muslims. Now we'll make sure that your Muslim granddaddy is thrown into fire, just like we, you know, uh, sort of burn our people in fire. So that was a retaliation. Then Churamar, his son, made sure that it continued, and then that's what this particular chapter talks about. And then it moves carefully towards how different clans of Punjab and Haryana, because back then Punjab and Haryana was not something that was called Punjab and Haryana. They were, different villages. It was a province. Like back in the south, there's Madras. There was Madras province. There were no Karnataka. There was no, Tamil Nadu at that point in time. So all of that is covered here. How different clan came into picture, and then this book finally ends in how Nadir Shah plundered Delhi. He made sure that he had a perfect plan to attack a weak Mughal army under the most one of the most weakest Mughal king at that point in time, and that's when Maratha also grew in power in Deccan, and they were challenging Mughals, from this Deccan, and then Nadir Shah came plundering and attacked on the weak Mughal army, who were not really managed properly by the leader. So especially, you have to blame the king for it, the Mughal king for it. After Aurangzeb. So that's what this book talks about, and it describes in detail as to how Nadir Shah went about, attacking, planning, and first making sure that, Mughals um were mentally disintegrated. He attacked their leaders, made sure they came out of the camps, and then he attacked them. So there's a detailed plan about his conquest there, his battle there with Mughal army, and so I'll just this is what it talks about. Let me just give you the name of the guy who was name of the king who was uh, the leader of the king of Mughal army. Mm, okay, so okay, I'm not getting the name here right now, but it was Mughal emperor who met Nadir Shah on February 26, 1739. That's when Mughal army gave up, surrendered to Nadir Shah's army. Okay, so Nadir Shah is from Central Asia, a figure from Persia, and he attacked Delhi in 1739. So all of these details are beautifully captured in this book through the writer, the story of the book, Arjun Singh Karian. And post that, it says that for the next 2 decades, the Marathas and the Mughals were involved in numerous negotiations. Between 1739 and 1761, Delhi was sacked 5 times by Afghan Ahmad Shah Abdali and once by Maharaja Surajmal, and once by Gujar and once by Baloch of Rohtak, and 8 times by Rohilla and the Marathas. Consequently, the environs of Delhi and Haryana and the life of its people was full of turmoil. So it describes a period between 1739 to 1761 when Delhi was attacked by a lot of people because the Mughal emperor, the seat of the emperor, who were powerful kings back in the time of Aurangzeb, before him, of course, Akbar the Great, and then before him, Babur, and in between Humayun and Shah Jahan. All of those were powerful leaders. They made contributed a lot to Mughal dynasty. But after Aurangzeb, this thing kind of fell apart. These Mughal emperors were not really powerful, and eventually, okay. So the name of the king was Shah Alam. So now I remember, and so Shah Alam was a weak king, and he made sure that all these people could attack Delhi during 1739 to 1761. That's when Mughals' power really came down. And so Ahmad Shabdali, Maharaja Surajmal, Gujars, all of these people attacked. Maratha became important player. This book also talks about that. And in fact, they signed a pact with Mughal Emperor and Wazir Safdarjung in 1752. And that's when it was decided that Peshwa will be appointed the governor of Agra, Mathura, Narnaul, and Ajmer on the condition that he would maintain the existing administration. So just imagine, we don't know much about our history. I think I was not aware of it. We all read history. We all get to know about history through various ways, but it gives you a holistic picture of what was happening back then. So Marathas were actually, in control of Delhi and its surrounding region during that time. They were so powerful, and Mughal army was not all powerful. And so this moves. It talks about various other, you know, issues that happened. It also talks about when Dali, who was attacking Delhi, during this period, he left Delhi on 20th March 1761, and Abdali had ousted Shah Alam's, the Mughal emperor, weak Mughal emperor, nemesis Imad ul Mulk from the Red Fort, and installed Najib ul Dawla. So Najib was a Rohilla. He was somebody who was loyal to Abdali, Ahmed Shah Abdali, and Ahmed Shah Abdali, the Afghan, you know, intruder, made sure that the power was not with the king, Shah Alam, but in the hands of his installed representative in the Mughal court. His name was Najib ad Dawla. So there's a story that goes on, and so you read about it. In the following chapter. It also talks about the Surajmal and his role in making sure that the Jat power continued to grow in and around Delhi and Haryana area, and made sure that Mughals felt his presence back then when he came into power. So it also says that Mughal Surajmal, who was expanded the Jat territories, taking it to the highest extent. Outside his Bharatpur principality, Surajmal's territory included Agra, Dholpur, Manpuri, Hathras, Aligarh, Tawa, and Meerut in UP. So it was a big area that he had control of. And in Haryana, he had control of Rohtak, Farrukhnagar, Mewat, Rewari, and Gurgaon. So Suraj Mal is remembered as the Plato or Plato of the Jats tribes by historians. So he's called like that. He had 5 sons, and he died on 25th December 1763. So this is what this particular chapter covers. It also talks about another incident that happens, with the Sardars. That's another chapter altogether. I've talked about it in detail in the previous live stream. You can go check it out. So this was about this particular chapter called Charts, Navsadars, and Nawabs, and you will move forward, and era of anarchy. So now that this is the time when East India Company really came into its own. Since Mughals were struggling to maintain the status quo, the power, though they had this, centuries of rule in India through various kings and powerful army, but they were lacking in leadership during that time. And that's when, in this void, in this vacuum, when India was being attacked from all sides, because they knew that India did not have powerful ruler, uh, English company, East India Company, came on its own. That's what this chapter 2 talks about, era of anarchy. So they kind of took benefit of it all. And it says that after the third battle of Panipat, regional leaders of Jats and Sikhs and Rohillas, along with all India powers like the Marathas and Europeans, were involved in conflicts in Haryana. So Haryana is the center point here. They are all these communities are vying for power. Local leader, community leaders, big forces like Maratha, established empires like Mughals. They're all fighting for making just to make sure that they continue in power. And so then this particular chapter in this um, chaos all over. This is a section here in this chapter, which talks about how Sikhs were fighting within themselves, among themselves, and all of this has been explained in detail here. Then it talks about other Sikh sardars and how they led their groups. They were called missiles. So that's what been explained here. But if I talk about the important point of this particular chapter, it says, you know, how Marathas after, because if you check my live stream before, Marathas, the first one, Maratha was Marathas were in power, I mean, in Deccan, and they were challenging Mughals. But after the third battle of Panipat, when their leader, Sadashiv Rao, was injured, badly killed, in fact, by um, uh, the forces of Ahmad Shah Abdali, who made sure that he couldn't escape, and he made an wrong move there, because Surajmal was wanting some other way to fight Ahmad Shah Abdali, and they went ahead and just fought them directly, and it cost them their lives and the battle. The third battle of Panipat, according to historians, would have changed the whole um, uh, fate of India, because had Marathas won that war, in historians, most of historians view Hindu control would have been there on India and not English control, which happened eventually. So that's how important that third battle of Panipat was, and this book talks about that too. And so Surajmal was the Jat leader who wanted a guerrilla warfare, and the Maratha leader who was in control. I mean, who wanted to fight. Ahmad Shah Abdali was of the view that they should just directly fight, and they got badly hit by Ahmad Shah Abdali's forces. So all of that is covered here in the first and the second chapter, and so that's about it. And let me just if there's something that I can read out to you. Yes, so it says the routing of Maratha is a very significant event in modern Indian history, and it is said that with all the blood that spilled on the soil in Panipat, the land was red and the harvest for years black. And it also says, had Surajmal's counsel been followed, had Surajmal's advice to the Maratha leader that you should fight the guerrilla warfare instead of just directly fighting with Ahmad Shah Abdali's forces, uh, it is possible that his resistance would have been more successful. So that's what this book says. And then this chapter says, I'm sorry, in this era of anarchy, so that's how what happens. And then Marathas, for a decade they were like badly bruised, beaten by Ahmad Shah Abdali forces. They retreated back to where they were in power in Deccan, and made sure they made a comeback after 10 years. So this book says after the third battle of Panipat, they kind of started making their presence felt after 10 years. During By 1770, they were in the northern territories again, and this time around, their leaders were Mahaji Sindhya and Tukoji Holkar. So these were the two important figures back then, and they made sure that Najib al-Dawa, who was Ahmad Shah Abdali's representative in the Mughal court, uh, becomes weak. So this is how the politics is going on. And Ahmad Shah Abdali, by this time, after he has made sure that he has won the third battle of Panipat, he goes back to Afghanistan where he came from, and he's become weak because he's got some disease here. That's what this book says, and disease is a kind of an ulcer, and he's not able to, and it's right where his mouth or nose is, and he just cannot. He's not fit. He's bedridden, so he cannot support his representative Aldawa, Najib Aldawa, and that's when Maratha feels that they have to really go on, push to get the power that they needed all this while, and they made sure that they. So during this time, what happens is that since Ahmad Shah Abdali's attacked Delhi and made sure that he represents Aldawa is the one who's taking care of Mughal, the seat of Delhi. The king Shah Alam retreats to Allahabad because he fears his life. Because Ahmad Abdali would not be kind to him. He does not want him to make decisions there. So he goes to Allahabad, but since Ahmad Abdali could not support his representative, uh, Mughals made sure that Shah Alam came back to power, and they wanted him on the Mughal throne, and through him they wanted to control Delhi. So that's what this book talks about, and eventually this is what happens, and this chapter talks about. I'm sorry, and Shah Alam, went about his business. He was back on the throne of Delhi, and the story goes further, and now, Mahaji Sindhya, who is the Maratha, was one of the most powerful commander in the country. His army was trained in French ways, disciplined and organized, and possessing rich coffers. So, Mahaji Sindhya, the Maratha leader, is a rich guy now, and he controls the Mughal court through his representation there, because now Shah Alam needs his support, and he gives that support, and in return they have the power in the court to make those big decisions. All of that has been talked about in this chapter, and it says that Emperor at the public darbar appointed the Peshwa as his deputy as well as the commander in chief, subject to the written condition that Mahaji Sindhya and no one else should be the permanent agent of the Peshwa in discharging the actual functions of this office. So this is what I was saying to you. And the Sikhs by the 1780s dominated the entire Punjab. Uniting factor among different Misl was their faith. Driven by service, the Sikhs faced the Afghans, Mughals, and Marathas, negotiating their best interest. And again, in whatever situation, the Mughal realm threw at them. So back at this during this time, this is how Punjab was uh, kind of organized, and then this book moves forward and it talks about Mahaji Sindhya. He came to Delhi after Najib's death. So, Representative Ahmed Abdali has died, and his son Zabita Khan, since he would have wanted power, he escapes because he thinks that now Marathas would not let him be here and represent Delhi under Ahmed Abdali's, you know, uh, rule in a way, because Ahmed Abdallah is back in Afghanistan. He's nursing a disease. He would not really, as it's mentioned that he will die later on. So now Maratha have really gotten hold of complete Mughal court after Nazaf's, Nazib's death, sorry. And Zabita Khan escapes. And following his death, Zabita's son, so Ghulam Qadir, is there. And then this book talks about the story of Ghulam Qadir also. He tries to attack Delhi. All of that has happened, and how he rapes, loots people, and finally Marathas attack and make sure that this Ghulam Qadir guy is killed. And the way he's been killed, is horrible. You can read that in page 50. And then this book talks about, okay, what happens is that Ghulam Qadir also, you know, um, he he takes his eyes, Shah Alam's eyes. I mean, Shah Alam's eyes. Uh, Shah Alam has been blinded by a knife by Ghulam Qadir. So, so he's blind now, the Mughal emperor, and but he has the support of Mahaji Sindhya, and so they are working to make sure that Delhi kind of gets settled and it has a proper leadership, and people are not really worrying about their lives, their homes, because attacks are happening in this era, in this time, and nothing is settled. Just like the way it is right now in Ukraine, Russia is attacking, and they have no way. People, the common people, are suffering because of that. So all of that was happening, just akin to that, just like that. And so during that time, the way it was organized was that north of Haryana was rested with Sikhs. Nazaf Kuli Khan had occupied territories of Rewari, Narnaul, Gurgaon, Jajjar, Rohtak, and posed an independent ruler. Sirsa, Fatehabad rested with Bhattis, and except for the immediate neighborhood of Delhi, almost all of Haryana was virtually independent now. So the way it was set up was that Mughal emperor did not have any control over Punjab or Haryana. For that matter, he had just neighbor, control over some part of Delhi. You know, so that's amazing. I mean, can you imagine that? The power with Mughal emperor was confined to just few kilometers. Just imagine that. So Mahaji Sindhya was dispatched, and they wanted them to confront these Sikhs and these Bhattis and all of these leaders, that they are able to come under Mughal rule again. So that's been talked about here, and eventually Maratha succeeded in having some treaties with these leaders, who broke the treaties, then came back again in the fold, in the Mughal fold, and broke the treaties again. So all of that has been explained here. So they needed help, and now comes the time of English people. So this particular chapter has talked about a guy called George Thomas, and this explains in detail how enterprising English actually became. So I would say that George Thomas kind of became a representation of how English thought during that time. Not all, I mean, at least that's how the mindset was back then. George Thomas, he was born in Tipperary in Ireland, and in the year 1758, and he came to India as a common sailor in a British warship around the year 1780. So he is a common Englishman. After setting his foot in Madras, he quit these services and moved to greener pastures in India, just like many other Europeans and in those days did. And so he served a lot of rulers in South India, and Mahaji Sindhya's army was the one who kind of employed him. So they used to employ Marathas used to employ Europeans back then, and they had this commander Frenchman called De Boyne. And around 1787, Thomas arrived in Delhi on foot and soon got commissioned into the service of Begum Samru of Sardana. So there's a story of it, quite a story, of it as well. And so that's been explained here in this chapter. But how in the few how he struggled. So why they talked about George Thomas is because he's one of the guys who stood out during that time as an Englishman, as someone who was not aware of the topography of India, the geography of India. He had no idea, no inkling of who's dealing with. He made sure that through his quick-witted, quick knowledge, quick mind, I'm sorry, and quick decision making and bravery and fortitude, he was able to build an army of his own. I mean, he made sure first he progressed as a fine, uh, you can call him general or somebody who commanded a lot of respect from his army under Marathas. And then eventually he formed an army of his own before he was dispatched to Scotland, though he did not succeed in going back to Scotland because he dies midway in the ship. So all of that is explained. So he talks about how brave he was, and he made sure that he had a region of his own during that time in India. Just imagine. It says that there's a map here. You can you won't be able to make out how this map is, but if you look carefully, this area, this area was entirely George Thomas, fort, you can say, and he made sure that he built an army of his almost 5,000 people who were under him. He was their king. He was their lord, and he fought as an independent ruler. Just imagine, and that was again in Haryana. So that's what has been talked about. Hansi is the area in modern day Hisar. So Hansi was the area he occupied, and now it's called Hisar, and became his capital. So, in fact, he was so brave that a lot of people really appreciated him for that. And so, all of that has been talked about in this particular chapter. And then it talks about another um, guy called Skinner, James Skinner. I mean, these were brothers, and they kind of made a good name for themselves in India under British rule, and how British came on their own. Um, during this time. So by in 1829, all these people by 1888. I mean, during that time, British Army. I mean, I would say at the outset of 18th century, 1801, 1801 or two onwards, Britishers really were a force to reckon with in India, and they made their presence felt with a lot of, you know territory they occupied eventually. So during that time, on the Delhi throne, Shah Alam II was still living. He had outlived all his enemies, and he was a de facto ruler in the north with Marathas. But Maratha was slowly declining, and affairs were in shambles. The English, however, understood the importance of the Takht. Takht means Mughal Empire, and through the preceding decades, the English were engaged in numerous struggles against the Marathas and the French, and eventually, in September 1803, Wellesley, the general of Britishers East India Company, took over the Sindhyas in the Deccan and General Lake. Commander-in-chief of the Bengal Army fought in the Doab and Delhi as the Sindhya commander. His commander fled, his Frenchman, Maratha's commander. Mm, British soldiers defeated the Marathas. And the 1803 Anglo Maratha battle is significant in Indian history. Indeed, but for Haryana, the battle brought a seismic shift in its politics, administration, and society. So, this particular chapter ends with that scene where English took over, and Marathas became weak and they conceded defeat. So in a way, all of this is happening in and around Haryana because Haryana is close to Delhi, and that's where the power was. And era of anarchy, in a way, kind of came to a close because now the control of power was suddenly shifting in foreign hands after Maratha was defeated uh, considerably. So this was the end of the second chapter, which I did talk about in my previous live stream, but kind of audio had a problem and I couldn't really record it. So you couldn't really, see it. So we'll move on to the third chapter. Before that, I'll take a small break. It's almost 30 minutes since I've been here, and I'll be back in about 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I was thirsty. Okay. So now we'll read the third chapter, and I hope. Okay. So we are in the third chapter now. It's called the First War. Uh, Now, since you already know now that what has happened till now, we have completed 68 pages. So this first war is another 30-page chapter. All right. So we'll start reading, and then I'll keep talking about, in between. I'll make sure that I don't keep silent for long periods of time now. And in this particular stream, I'll keep explaining to you what I've read in about few pages, and we'll talk about it. I'll talk about it. Please mention your comments in the, you can drop down your comments here in case you ever come on the live. I know that they're not any one as a point at this point in time, only two people. So comment if you have if you want to read along with me. You can pick any other book as well. I mean, that's not the problem. It's all about reading. So I've chosen this particular time because I think it's the perfect time to actually come pick a book, because it's not too late. It's and you can always read a page or two or a chapter or two in an hour or two before you go to sleep, and it's a good habit because rather than watching mindless TV which does not give you anything whatsoever, you can get a lot of information and build a concentration in the process. Books help you immensely doing that. I'm able to concentrate at a stretch on a particular topic, and that gives me an edge when it comes to concentrating on things, and it does reading does help. So all of that can be done. So if you feel like reading and you're missing out on it, you can certainly pick a book today, right now, and come along on this live stream and just read it out and talk about experience reading any book that you want to read, not just this book because I'm reading it. I wanted to share this information with you. That was the idea. And you can do it too, reading any book that you want to, but just come on the live stream. Okay, so I've read about 5 pages of this book, of this third chapter till now, or more. It's almost pages, and this particular chapter covers about it will eventually cover the War of 1857, the first war of independence that India fought. But before that, what happened? It talks about how after the Maratha War, the Anglo-Maratha War of 1803, Britishers came into prominence. They became stronger, and they were able to exert their supremacy all around Haryana. And it also says that how the way the Britishers started to rule India became different from what Marathas or before them Mughals were doing back then. So they say that uh, the the Marathas, the Mughal emperor Shah Alam II, Babur's descendant, was confined to Delhi, to Red Fort, and he was given a pension. Now he was a pensioner under the company, East India Company. And you know and during that time a role became, I mean, just like Ahmad Shah Ali appointed his guy in the court, same way East India Company appointed a resident, the representative of the Queen. And there were lots of people who did that. David Octoloni, Archibald Seton, Charles Metcalfe, William Fraser, all of these people actually, sat as a resident and eventually held the power, not the king. I mean, king was just like right now the president of India. In the same way, he was not the de facto leader. He just remained as somebody who was, you know, uh, an emperor, but a pensioner. So the Britishers took control, and all of these territories now, Haryana region especially, were under control of different leaders, different chiefs, and become difficult for Britishers to take charge. Make sure that it's all under control of East India Company. So all of that has been explained. Uh, it says that this guy, the resident, uh, who was appointed all these people, he was given a monthly package of 90,000 rupees back then. I'm talking about 1803. Imagine 90,000 rupees per month. And he served as both diplomat and advisor to the ruler and monitored the activities of the state, I mean India. And it included 60,000 of His Majesty's private expenses, and remaining 30,000 goes towards other affairs. And later it was increased to 1,25,000 rupees in 1833. So that's what happens, and all of that, territories moved again. So all of that, there's a change in the way East India Company brought about, um you know, control of power. Territories were given to a number of chiefs who had rendered services to Britishers in a fight against Marathas in 1803. So all of that happened. Its book clearly mentioned who all got what. All these leaders' names have been mentioned, and you know Begum Samru, one of the women, is also given, ruler has also is also given a territory. So all of this particular chapter talks about, and so bringing things in order was tough for East India Company, as it says, and there was immediate trouble in the northern territories of Haryana, like Ambala, like Karnal, all of those areas which were like adjoining Punjab, which was not Punjab again, where Sikh control was there. That's the region where Britishers found it difficult to make their headway because there are lots of people there. So what they did was, they tried to make headway in these territories, and eventually they were able to succeed. Was what they did was between 1809 and 1810, a large British column was finally able to defeat the Bhattis. Now, Bhattis are the people who controlled a certain area. It's Sirsa, Fatehbad, Raina. they were a strong challenge to the Britishers. So in 1803, a military fort was established in Hansi, and then Britishers were able to make foray. They defeated Bhattis. Finally, between 1809 1810, that's when they were able to take control of that area. And so it talks about all of that, and then it talks about the stories of local leaders, how they fought between themselves, and how they were actually vying for power against Britishers. So all of that has been talked about here. And it says that a cantonment was established in Karnal, and so that's happened. And but still a part of Punjab, area which was called Cis Satluj state, state a Sikh state between the rivers of Satluj and Yamuna. That area was still under control of Sikhs, and Sikhs were now a powerful army under the leadership of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who was a powerful, charismatic leader. You need to read about him to know exactly the kind of guy he was. He was. This book also mentions that he was somebody who, through his sheer grit, willpower and determination, was able to control the region of that area. I mean, Satluj area, which is between Satluj and Yamuna. That area he was able to have a grip over, and Britishers had to, do negotiations with him because they could not just take control over the region, and they needed to negotiate with him so that they could at least make some headway and get some peace. I mean, get some hold of that area in terms of how they wanted to negotiate it. So all of that has been mentioned here. It says that under the new circumstances, all Malwa chiefs were brought under British protection, and Maharaja Ranjit Singh was asked to move all his forces west of Satluj. That this march was welcomed by different chiefs, including Jind, Faridkot, which was occupied by Lahore, and Treaty of Friendship between Ranjit Singh and the East India Company was signed in Amritsar in 1809. So that happens here, and then in 1819, the civil and political functions of the resident, the guy who was controlling the Mughal court, was separated, and now under C.T. Metcalfe, the new leader, the new resident of Delhi, he made sure there were certain functions that were separated. He made northern division, central division, southern division, and in 1820, the designation of the commissioner was changed to deputy superintendent, and he was placed under the resident, which means David Metcalfe, the guy who controlled all of it all. And so Britishers now, this East India Company was now being controlled by the British Parliament, of course, the Queen, and a lot of charters that were passed. That's what it says. This book says, and by 1813, the 1813 charter, it says a new political division was formed, northwestern provinces with its headquarter at Agra, and the territory of Haryana became one of the six divisions of the new province. And then this book moves on, and it says that after there was another war that happened between Maratha, because Maratha was not ready to give up yet, and they fought again with the Britisher. And but in this third Anglo-Maratha war, British Marathas were destroyed completely. And in 1899, 1819, I'm sorry, uh, Britishers took complete control of all the territories in the north. But on the other side of Cis Satluj, Ranjit Singh still controlled the Sikh army and the regions. So you know he had this. If you're not aware, he had this habit of you know drinking alcohol. So he was an alcoholic. He used to drink a lot, but he was an able king. So Britisher knew that weakness of his, and that weakness eventually took his life. He died in 1839. He ruled from 1801 till 1839. So that was a good period of rule that Maharaja Ranjit Singh had. And he had Kohinoor. If you don't know, then this should be a bit of a fact for you that he had Kohinoor, And Kohinoor first went from the Mughal Sultanate, from it changed hands. If, I'm sure you know that Nadir Shah took it, the Kohinoor from the Mughals, and then from Mughals it changed hands, and eventually it came back to Ranjit Singh. Not came back, but came into Ranjit Singh's hand in 1813. And eventually, when Maharaja Ranjit Singh died, Britishers took control of all that area, because now there was no leader, and they were easily able to defeat a lot of other leaders in about 10 years from that particular time when Maharaja died, Ranjit Singh died, and Kohinoor belonged to the British. So all of that has been talked about. Then there is this, uh, you know, area called Loharu between Hisar district and you know Rajpur district, Laharo town of about 60 village. And here they have just talked about this. I don't know why, but it says that Loharo family traces its lineage to, it's important that Sufi scholar and poet from Uzbekistan. The family migrated to India from Bukhara and became one of the principal nobles in the royal court of Delhi. So this Loharo residency is, area is so important because, you know, famous Urdu poet Mirza Ghalib was married into this family. Another prominent poet, Dag Delvi, was the son of Shamshuddin Ahmad Khan, and Shamshuddin Ahmad Khan was, a Loharu uh, leader, you can say. And I mean, he was controlling that area. So in that way, it is important, this particular family that they have talked about. So I've read till here, and I'll move to another topic called Karnal challenges. So you, by this time, you already know that Britishers have taken control of Sis Satluj area after Ranjit Singh death, and they have control over Haryana, they have control over Delhi, and they have defeated Marathas. So all that area also is under their control. So they are pretty much in control of India now, especially that part of India. Um, okay, so we have to read a lot of pages here, and I think okay, so we'll move forward and we'll read further. Okay, so now we have read. I've read about a lot of pages now. So I've covered what is happening now in Haryana, and how Britishers, who were in control now of all of northern India and other parts of it, were making sure that it remains so. So in Haryana, much like elsewhere, the book says that in India, multiple things became the reason for the revolt of 1857. Now, this book basically covers the first war. So, why it happened? It happened because the village communities back then were self-sufficient. So they did not really interfere in who was in power in Delhi, who took control, whether it was Jat for some time or Mughals or Ahmad Shah Abdali Nadir Shah. They made sure that their village system kept on working the way it was like before. But English people, unlike Mughals and unlike Marathas, and even unlike kings before that, made interference. I mean, they made sure that they interfered in the system. They made sure that they made a judgment over who did wrong, because before that, village panchayat, the Kha panchayat or village panchayat, decided if somebody what was to be punished. This example was given here in this book, that you know somebody who's accused of stealing would be called to the panchayat, and he was asked to admit his crime. If not, then he would be persecuted by the whole village, meaning that nobody will talk to him, nobody will do business with him, which will be like, you are outside the village community now. So that never nobody wanted. But in the new system of English people, Britishers, they set up a court, and they made sure they, through they obviously, when court came into picture, a judge came in, and then a lawyer came in, and lawyer would pass judgments which were incorrect, and there was no way anyone could verify if it did wrong or not. So all that system changed completely, and the writers mentions that somebody like Roshan Khan was imprisoned for life and hard labor for having been accused of stealing three and a half, 7 lbs of bread. So he some amount of bread he stole, and he was given life imprisonment according to the Britisher. And somebody like Ramadia, he was imprisoned for 7 years in 1815 for a similar charge, similar theft. Like he stole food. So reaction of people like was like really bad. That what are they doing here? British are interfering in our lives, and so they wanted to boycott them. They really wanted in their hearts of hearts that Britishers went back to Britain, and they didn't want them to interfere in Indian way of life. And apart from the revenue and judicial interference, company did a lot of economical damage. You know the the way it was mentioned here is that they were asked to pay. Normally they were asked to pay in February and September, and that was not. It was much before harvest, so even before a farmer could harvest his crops, he was asked to pay money, and they were levied taxes indiscriminately, meaning that they would be asked to pay a lot of money for a small yield of crops, which was not something that they were accustomed to, and Britishers were really bad at that. So all of this hurt farmers, and it had havoc on their dependents. And this political social scenario changed completely under British rule. So all of that has been talked about here, and it says that you know ancestral states of Revari and Ballabgarh were reduced, and under Company Raj. And religion angle cannot be ignored. A lot of Jesus praying, Jesusites, people who wanted missionaries, Christian missionaries came to India, and they wanted to spread Christianity here, and they fooled people into believing by giving them Bible and saying that it is their own pothi. Back then, nobody knew what a book was. Not something which is common back then. It was really expensive to have a printed piece of paper because it just came into picture in the 19th, 18th century, and 19th century, 1801, right? So it during that time, people were uneducated. So if Britisher told them this is true, they believed it. So they were told that it is a Nirvana Jnana book, and you should read it. So that was eventually, um, some people found out that it's this is not correct. So they started interfering in the religious matters too, Indians religious matters too, and that brought Britishers in bad light. And they all I mean all of the Indians wanted them to go back to their country. They didn't want them to interfere because they didn't feel like Britishers belonged here. So it talks about how basically first the rebellion started in Ambala, and then in Meerut. And 10th of May 1857 is when you know that happened, because during that time there was a, as you know why it happened, because a rifle was being used to load cartridges which were greased with cow fat and pig fat. That was the rumor, that was the news. And because of that, a lot of people thought that this is being done by Britishers just to, you know, uh, convert them to Christianity, which was a big thing back then. If you are playing into the hands of or sentiments of Indians who are Hindus or Muslims, they didn't want them to, didn't want it, right? So who would want that? So because of that, rebellion happened, and Anson, General Anson, was the commander in chief back then. He we went to Shimla. He was not aware, so he was like before. I mean, he was. So there's a description here that Anson is going to the cool environments of Shimla, and here in the hot month of May in Ambala, a rebellion is cooking, and people start believing that they don't want British rule. So all of this has been explained here. How uh, the first time, um, by the end of April 1857, sorry, on 10th of May, rebellion was planned with open mutiny. Sunday morning at 9 a.m. on 10th May 1857, troop of soldier of 60th NI. NI means an infantry, basically a group of soldiers left their lines with loud patriotic spirit, seized arms, and arrested their European superiors and officers. Few pushes here and some knocks there, they broke out in mutiny. So that's what happened, and the murmurs of what happened at the 60th NI, was still making its way, and everybody was actually swift in action. I mean, and a lot of people now started rebelling. So the news spread like wildfire, and eventually Haryana was in the grips of this news, and everybody revolted in all parts of Haryana and surrounding Delhi. So that's all that's been mentioned here: how people attacked, how people killed Britishers, and they eventually marched then to Delhi, 300 rebel troops, and they marched into Gurgaon. They controlled Gurgaon, and then from there to Mewat, and then from there to Jaipur, and eventually in Narnaul Rewari belt, Raos, who were the locals, they actually broke out in mutiny. So the war kind of commenced, and Rohtak, where Jats were there, there was a big rebellion there too, and all of this was happening, and so that's what been described, and eventually, uh, you know, um, Commander in Chief Anson, he was attacked by cholera, a disease which broke out there, which was common there in Haryana during that time in that region, and he died. So, the flames of revolt spread like wildfire all over Hansi, Rohtak, Lucknow, Kanpur, Narnaul, all of those areas. You know, Indians revolted against Britishers. So that's what's been talked about here in this book. You'll also find detailed stories of how this was happening, and you know, Sonipat, Karnal, Panipat, Rohtak. So all this has been talked about here. And now I move to the last part of this particular chapter, Jagirs and Jagirdars, and then you know will be another 3 pages, and then Rao Tula Ram stand, all of that, and then Rise of Toddies, and this chapter ends. So we have another 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages to go. If you are on this live, and if you really like this whole chapter or story, if you want to read this book, I mean, this book is available on Amazon. You can order this book, Land of the Gods, the story of Haryana. Or if you're interested in history, you can always read this book. It has detailed descriptions of all of it, and I really am enjoying it because it has facts and figures about what happened when and who was doing it. Actually, it goes into details, like it gives you an example of guy called Udiram Jat. He's from Sonipat and chief of Haryana's Sarv Khap Panchayat. he raised an army and revolted against the Britishers in Sonipat. And, he was eventually overpowered by Britishers, but he did not kill any European women, I mean, Britishers or their children. But eventually, when British, overpowered him, they put him to trial and he was sentenced to death. And he was pushed against a tree and nails were driven through him, just like Jesus. Imagine you're alive and a nail is being pushed into your hand, in your legs, and you are nailed to a tree. And he stayed alive. The book says he stayed alive, breathing through extreme pain for 35 days before attaining martyrdom. So he died, tied to that tree for 35 days. Imagine. And he was in immense pain during this time. And Britishers did this to him. And it all happened during that revolt of 1857. So all of these details are packed into these pages. Important details like in Hansi, if you remember, I talked about George Thomas, the Britisher who was a guy who made impact back before Britishers were not in power, from Scotland. So he in that area, Hansi, a troop. It says the book says revolted, and the guy Wedderburn, who was a local European Britisher chief there, along with 12 soldiers and 12 European officers, were killed, and the treasury of worth 1,70,000 was taken away from them. So all of this was happening, all of this was happening all around Haryana, in different places of Haryana during that time, and just it was just uncontrollable. It also says that GT Road was essential for the Britishers. The same GT Road through which we now travel from Delhi to Haryana, Sonipat, Panipat. So that particular road was essential for Britishers to ensure functioning supply lines and movement of troops to Punjab in Haryana, northern parts of Haryana. So English could not risk them to the rebels. So Jind Raja was protecting that particular road. So British ensured that that road was not attacked by people who were revolters, because if that happened, they would not have control over the goods and all the ammunition that is traveling to control all those areas. So British were really swift. So that's what this particular chapter talks about. And similarly, all of these small stories that have been talked about in this particular book, you would really enjoy reading all of this. It is a wonderful book in terms of, if you want to have that piece of history with you. And if you, I mean, imagine that it seems like it is about Haryana and all adjoining areas, but you will hear all sorts of people here: Scottish, European, French, Muslims who came, whose family migrated from parts of Persia, Pakistan into India, and how that was established. So I've not really talked in detail about all of that because it will be a long discussion if I do that. But if you read this book, if you like these kind of stories, you will certainly stick to this particular book, and you'd want to read more of it. So, as I've described to you till now, and now we'll move to this particular category, which is Jagirs and Jagirdars, and then in another 5 pages, this chapter ends. So let's read it. And if you like reading, I mean, you can always, I mean, I see some people here on the live stream, so you can communicate with me through chat if you want to. And you can read a book right now if you want to really get in this habit of reading book, because I do live streams now, and I want to get in this habit of doing it every day. And if I miss a day or two or three, it might be because I'm also working on a video, editing a video, because that's what I do in my free time once I have that free time. But right now I'm reading a book, so you should also, and read any book that you want to. As I've said to you before, just pick it up and start reading with me. Maybe you would have this company, and it will encourage you to read more and more. So why not do that right now when you're free, or if you can. Mention to me in the comments if you think you want to read this book or read some other book, any of the book that you want to read. Just drop in a comment right now, and that'll be great. And encourage other people also that you that we can get into this habit of reading, right? So I'm back to the book. Okay, so I have finished the last chapter, third chapter, First War, and let me just give you a quick update about what I've read till now. And it's the end of the third chapter, so we have covered the belt, the First War, and now it talks about Jagirs and Jagirdars. So by 1857, there were around 10 princely states in Haryana: Jhajjar, Farrukhnagar, Pallabgarh, Patodi, Loharu, Buria, Kalsia, and Jind. So, there were 11 Jagirs apart from these princely states. And, if you understand the response of these princely states, how actually they responded to, because, there's a faction now. One faction which started the revolt on 10th of May was fighting for Mughal emperor, and they wanted India to be free of Britishers. And the other faction, of course, wanted Britishers to win. So all these princely states and Jagirs were divided in their, uh, support to the Britishers. So some wanted to support Britishers and some were against it. So it kind of explains in detail here, the ancient town of Jhajjar. Now, this is where it talks about, they allied with neither Britishers nor, the Mughals. So the Nawab of, that particular estate, princely estate, he started lending support to English officers. But what happens is that when Mughal emperor contacted him, he said that, what, I will give you money also. So in a way, he was supporting both of them, but he was playing a game here with Britishers. So Theo Metcalfe, who was the resident commander in chief, or during that time, who was somebody who was, resident in Delhi, somebody who was appointed by East India Company to look after the affairs. So when he asked him for help, because at that point in time, Britishers were, in a struggle to regain control of Delhi and surrounding areas. So he was not granted his audience, Nawab's audience, the book says. And instead, he was sent with two escorts, and he was sent to a shelter place where he could be, safe from the rebels, because they were out there to kill him. And he was really sad about this, because he wanted to make sure that, he felt, uh, insulted, because he was a high ranking official and he did not want that to happen. So this book explains that Nawab is playing a game here. He's also protecting his interest, and he's also showing to the Mughal emperor and the rebels that, I'm with you guys. But he never gave them money. To Britishers, he never supported completely. So this was the case with him. And eventually, Metcalf was able to escape, the rebels' sights, and he was able to land in Hunsi, where the Skinners were able to support him. Another Britishers that I talked about later before, and after that he moved. He really was successful in controlling the rebels, because a lot of East India Company's, arms and ammunition and soldiers kept pouring in to fight against the soldiers, fight against the rebels. So he took his revenge in eventually from the Nawab. So it says that this particular story, talks about all this particular Jagirdar's part, and it says that intense battles were fought in different villages, one village after another, and the local population was in there, bearing the brunt of it. So it explains here that somebody, a high-ranking British soldier, British officer, was killed in Katarwa village, which is in Sirsa, and Captain Hillard and his brother-in-law, they were being killed. And Britishers, what they did, they made sure that they were those locals were ruthlessly butchered. The house was destroyed, burnt, and local population of Bhattis and Rangars in and around Hisar were mercilessly slaughtered. So, this was a horrible state of affairs back then, and rebels, were like, they did not have a clear goal of how to capture the control from British, take away the control from British. So Britishers were able to swiftly manage their affairs, and they had control over things. From May, it continued till November, September, and by September 1857, British took control of things. They were able to win over most of the posts that rebels took control of by sheer determination and refreshments. Britishers were able to do that. So it explains that there's a brigadier called General Showers, and he marched on to 2nd October 1857 and brought south of Haryana under British control. And rebels from Gurgaon, Rewari were quickly subdued. And after that, he went around Rampura and then to Jhajjar. That's where the Nawab was. And Nawab was taken captive, and his treasury was also taken in control, 5 lakh rupees at that point in time. And only the two forces were left now fighting back and were against Britishers. One was Tularam in Narnaul, and the other was Mewatis. So they were the only one that they were fighting in Haryana now. And Showers, the brigadier, took a route to Delhi and went through Sona, Farooq Nagar, and other regions, and he crushed the rebellion there. So and what the British did was back then they raped women in Delhi, high ranking, royal women in Delhi. They were raped, and poet Mirza Ghalib also talks about it in his, accounts. So he says to his friend Mirza Tafta, had you been there, you would have seen the ladies of the fort moving about the city, their faces as fair as the moon, and their clothes dirty, their pajamas legs torn, and their slippers falling to places. This is no exaggeration. So that's what Mirza Ghalib tells his friend Mirza Tafta. And a similar scene played in Ballabgarh, and the Raja was sent to Delhi as prisoner. So all of this is happening. Women were deprived of their jewelry, royal women, and they were stripped naked. So that's what the Britishers did to counter, Indian rebels. And eventually one of the important leaders of that rebellion, Rao Tula Ram, he stood firm in Narnaul, and he fought the Britishers, but they were also able to subdue him eventually. But he was able to kill a lot of English officers. So it was one of the most planned attack that happened against Britishers during that time by Rao Tula Ram, but he escaped their clutches. His army was destroyed, of course. Britishers took control of Narnaul too, and this guy, this uh, Rao Tularam, went, escaped the clutches of Britishers, went from there Haryana to Maharashtra. And then, he was looking for some support and help from outside forces in Russia. He went to even to Russia to seek help against Britishers, but he died in Kabul. And you can see Rao Tularam's, you know, testimonies or legacy still in places like Ravari, Gurugram, Mahendragarh, where there are chalks, buildings, statues, awards named after Rao Tularam. So that's his legacy. This book talks about, and then eventually, all of this was controlled. Mewat was also controlled. Finally, many Mewati villages were burned, and by the end of 1857, the struggle in Delhi and Haryana was subdued, and four magnificent Havelis of Delhi of Nawabs, Jhajjar, Bahadurgarh, and Farooqnagar, and were completely destroyed. So I wish we could have seen those Havelis, but they were completely destroyed. And eventually, Britishers, were able to then they punished all those princely states leaders who were against Britishers. So chiefly among them was, of course, Jhajjar's Nawab Abdur Rahman Khan, and he was hanged till death. Of course, he did not support Theo Metcalfe. If you remember, he was not granted his audience, and he was, Theo nursed a grudge against the Nawab. So he was killed, he was hanged, and then another Nawab, Farooq Nagar's Nawab, he was hanged at Kotwali in Chandni Chowk on 23rd January. And Ballabgarh's Raja Nahar Singh, he tried to build a strong case that he supported Europeans. He gave shelter to a lot of European women and children and men, but it fell on deaf ears, and he was also hanged. And all of that happened, and he was killed. And eventually, the Nahar Singh Palace Stadium, palace today is the property of Haryana Tourism. The stadium is named after him, and a Delhi metro station, Violet Line, has been named after him, Nahar Singh. So he was one of the Raja Nahar Singh of Pallabgarh, which is right adjacent to Faridabad, right, in today's times. So he was crushed. All of this was crushed. And now the last bit of this particular last chapter, third chapter, the first war, now there's just 2 pages left here. And this talks about an important family, a family of Patodis, and if you know, Saif Ali Khan belongs to that Pataudi's royal family, Soha Ali Khan. So there's an important account of how this royal family, their ancestors, were, what was their role in that 1857 war. So this particular 2 pages have, talked about that too. But I will not talk about it today because I want it to be a mystery for you, and then we'll read it tomorrow. I mean, I'll talk about it tomorrow and start with this particular, account of how Pataudi's played a role, in 1857. His ancestors, Saif Ali Khan's, the famous hero, the Bollywood actor, the Indian actor, and I'll talk about that tomorrow. And start with that, and then we'll start chapter 4 called For Freedom. And that brings me to the end of the stream and the third chapter. This is, I mean, this is a quite a book. I mean, filled with history of, Haryana and the wars and what happened back in 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, and to the present day Haryana as well. So I really like this book, a piece of history, a piece of our land where things happened centuries ago. And I wish everyone who wants to read history books should read this book. Give it a try, and I hopefully you would get a lot of knowledge out of it, and you'd know about our glory. I mean, our history, our glory days, our days of princely estates and jagirdars and whatnot. So I hope you enjoy this stream, and if you want to know more about what happens in the next chapters, and you're not reading this book, then you can definitely catch up with me tomorrow around, I'll try and reach out to you guys. I mean, I'll try and start the stream at around 8 or 9, or maybe earlier, 7:30ish or 8ish. And I hope you guys will be there tomorrow with me, and we'll do it again and again and again. And I hope you enjoyed, whoever watched this stream today. Thank you so much. And I'm going to end this stream, and I hope you comment below uh, when you watch this video again, because it will be saved here. And you can tell me how it was. Thank you. And if you have read any book till now, today, or you want to read, please sit with me tomorrow, and we'll read these books together. And you can share your experiences with me, along with me, and drop in a comment below whatever you had in mind today, or, you know, whenever you read those books, those chapters in the streams to come. Thank you. You have a good day. Good night.